Andres SERBIN will be speaking on the topic Latin America and the Caribbean in a Changing World Order. He's director of the Venezuelan Institute of Social and Political Studies, professor at the Central University of Venezuela, a former C.S.A. president. Recent books include Indifferent Neighbors, guess who, and The Caribbean Towards the Year 2000.
Thank you, Lecturer. Well, I'll try to focus briefly on the situation between Latin America and mainly the English-speaking Caribbean, not the wider Caribbean, but of course I'm going to take into account the other actors in the region. First of all, I think there is the need of briefly characterize which has been the main problems between Latin America and the Caribbean. I think, first of all, we have to see that traditionally they are deep-rooted in the history of the region, deep-rooted barriers and obstacles to the relation between Latin America and the English-speaking Caribbean. From my point of view, those are three main barriers. One is the language barrier, which is very difficult to overcome, as you can see from my own experience. Then the cultural, related to the language barrier, the cultural barrier, of course. And secondly, the geopolitical legacy of border conflicts between Latin American countries and English-speaking countries in the Caribbean, as the case of Guyana, Venezuela, and Guatemala and Belize. And thirdly, something that we have been doing some work on it, ethno-historical perceptions based on race and culture between Latin America and the English-speaking Caribbean, which of course are related to some of the subjects we are discussing during this 500 years of the encounter between the New World and the Old World. And one of these, of course, is the Black Legend and how the Black Legend of the Spanish conquest has influenced these perceptions. Well, but apart from these barriers, I would say that, however, during the last 30 years, there have been some attempts to a convergence, a rapprochement between Latin America and English-speaking Caribbean. Of course, the first stage in the 60s of the relations between Latin America and English-speaking Caribbean has been a stage of, I would say, not only indifference, but also some hostility. And the focus of this situation has been the Organization of American States, when Jamaica and Trinidad tried to apply to the Organization of American States, and the Latin American countries reacted with suspicion about their participation in this organization. Which had meant that the application had delayed for about 2 years in each case. However, we have to understand this first stage of divergence in terms of the general international situation and particularly the regional situation. And I think that the main point in this case is the case of the Cold War and the strategic importance of the region and the presence of Cuba. For many Latin American countries, the participation of Jamaica and Trinidad eventually would mean in the past some influence of the Cubans, because they were suspecting that they're going to establish some relations with Cuba, which effectively had happened in the 70s. The second stage is a stage of convergency in the 70s, but mainly in a completely different international situation. Basically, the increasing influence in the international system of the producers of raw materials, and particularly of oil and bauxite, and the increasing atmosphere of third worldism, the promotion of a new economic order by the third world countries. And I think the paradigmatic case for the 70s of this convergence is not the OAS, not the Organization of American States, but the creation of the Latin American economic system, where there had been this convergence between some countries of the English-speaking Caribbean and of Latin America. But unfortunately, this second stage of convergence, the only thing that it left was this, the CELA, the Latin American economic system, and the rest has been mainly rhetoric, and the links that were attempted to establish had been disappearing during the third stage in the 80s. This third stage of the relations between Latin America and the English-speaking Caribbean began with a clear divergence in terms of two particular situations. One was the Grenada invasion, where the Organization of American States has nothing to do, has not been invited. And secondly, the Malvinas War, of course, with the alienation of the English-speaking Caribbean with the British and the majority of Latin American countries with Argentina. So after these two situations in the 80s, what we have is an increasing indifference, also because there is an increasing concern about their own problems related to the economic crisis and external debt. Now, coming to the 90s and the effect of the global changes. I think we are in a completely new situation in terms of the relation between CARICOM and Latin America. First of all, after the end of Cold War, there is a loss of importance, strategic importance of the Caribbean basin. We have the increasing isolation of Cuba, and in this context, it seems that CARICOM is appearing as the main reference in terms of what's going on in the Caribbean. On the other side, there is also, as a consequence of economic globalization and interdependence, a general reaction of, I would say, an integrationist euphoria in all Latin America and the Caribbean, and everybody is aspiring to promote the integration scheme that existed before and to create some new integration scheme as a response to the global processes, the creation of the trade blocks, and the increasing interdependence. In this context, of course, we have some new integration schemes in Latin America as Mercosur and the Group of Three, and some old ones that have been promoted as the Common Market in Central America and the Andean Pact. And of course, there is a general expectation of what's going to happen with NAFTA and the participation of Mexico in the trade agreement with the free trade agreement with the United States. Well, what are the main consequences for the region? Well, first of all, from my perspective, Cuba is no longer the main actor as it had been before. And the CARICOM is emerging as the main reference for a lot of actors in the region. And secondly, I would say that the new interlocutors in the region are, on one side, CARICOM, and on the other side, the Group of Three. That means Mexico, Venezuela, and Colombia. From 1989 till today, if we talk about the good news, we can see that there had been a real rapprochement between CARICOM and the Group of Three. We had the increasing trade links, even if weak, between Mexico and Venezuela and the Caribbean. We have the participation of Mexico, Venezuela, and Colombia as observers at CARICOM. Even Venezuela is applying to a full member status in CARICOM. We have the Tobago Declaration between Venezuela and CARICOM. We have a lot of technical commissions working on some very specific subjects between Latin America and the English-speaking Caribbean. We have the promotion of the participation of the CARICOM at the Rio Group, and even an increasing participation of the English-speaking Caribbean in some commission of the Organization of American States. One of them, of course, is the one related to the Haitian situation. Also, there is a new trend in terms of increasing links between the CARICOM countries and the Central American countries. This, of course, vis-a-vis what's going on with the NAFTA and the common concern about the effects of NAFTA on the CBI and eventually on the other non-reciprocal trade arrangement that the region has. Perhaps one of the main points of this process is the recent meeting in San Pedro Sula in February between the CARICOM representatives and the Central American representatives. So it seems that there is a general trend to begin to look at each other, and I insist, I think that the main interlocutors in this situation are, on one side, the CARICOM countries, and on the other side, the group of three. But I would say that this is a very optimistic scenario of the possibilities of the relation and of the possibilities of overcoming the traditional indifference and the traditional hostility that existed between the two regions. If we analyze, first of all, the internal situation of CARICOM, we can see that there is a lot of problems in terms of the process of integration in CARICOM. There are some contradictions between the smallest countries and the more developed countries in the CARICOM. There is the problem of agreement on the common external tariff, and in general, in the CARICOM, there are some very particular situations that are not very optimistic about what's going to happen in the CARICOM. However, at the same time, even if CARICOM is the main reference at this moment in the Caribbean basin, the main actor, I would say, there is still a very parochial perspective of the relation with the rest of the actors in the region. And Dominican Republic, the Netherlands Antilles, Aruba, Suriname, and even Haiti are still in the limbo of being just observers at the CARICOM, and I don't think that in the short term they're going to be part as full members of the CARICOM. Then is the situation that is not resolved with Cuba. What's going to happen with Cuba? And in terms of the possibility of an eventual change in Cuba, that could mean a real threat to the CARICOM countries in terms of competition, about markets, in terms of the capacity of production, and even in terms of the relation with the main interlocutors outside the region. But finally, on the other side, there are also a lot of problems when we're talking about the group of three. Mexico, on one side, is participating, trying to develop the free trade agreement with the United States, and that is the economic side. On the other side, on the political side, it's trying to reinforce the links with Latin America, participating in the group of Rio and the group of three. But there is an increasing contradiction between the objectives and the priorities of Mexico in the region and the objectives and the priorities of the foreign policy of Venezuela and Colombia. At the same time, Venezuela and Colombia are in a very accelerated process of integration, but this process of integration between Venezuela and Colombia is not generalized to the rest of the Andean Pact, and the rest of the countries of the Andean Pact are still behind the schedule of the process of integration. So there is an increasing overlapping of Latin American integration and cooperation schemes, and increasing contradictions between them. And finally, the relationship between CARICOM and Central America, it's also under a threat, because we were talking about bananas. Jorge was talking about bananas recently, and after the San Pedro Sula meeting between the representatives of CARICOM and Central America, and after this apparent convergence, at the same time this week, 3 presidents of Central America are touring the European community, asking for some free access of their bananas to the European market. So there is again a contradiction between Central America and CARICOM. However, just to conclude, and as time is running up, I would say that this pessimistic scenario perhaps could be overcome if there is an increasing trend to, on one side, to establish more solid links in the region between the CARICOM and the rest of the Caribbean island countries, and on the other side, if there are some real serious attempts to overcome some of the contradictions in the group of three and the aspiration to create real links between the group of three and CARICOM. But that also depends on how is going to be the relation with the third main actor, which I didn't mention, but of course is the United States. Thank you.